joining us. Thank you for the coalition, the Colorado Coalition Against Sexual Assault, for allowing us to do this training for you all. So first of all, I just wanted to go ahead and kind of get a sense of where people are at as far as knowing about cases in their of human trafficking in general in their community, or having worked with this before. So if we could get to the first poll, I'm curious to see what some of those experiences have been.
Hi everyone, this is Rosa Molina from CCASA. I'm just going to be reading these poll questions for Karen. So please participate with us. To your knowledge, have you and/or your organization served a victim or survivor of human trafficking? Select one of the following. Yes, no, maybe I'm not sure. So far it looks like 60% of everybody has voted. We just want to keep you we want to know what you're seeing, so please vote. We're going to leave this open for about 10 more seconds. We're at 68% have voted. Thank you so much for participating. We really appreciate that. It means so much to us. I'm going to leave this open for one more second, see if we can get that up to at least 75%. We're at 73% now. So if you haven't voted, please let us know what you're seeing in your area. We've had it open long enough. I'm going to go ahead and close the poll, and then I will share these results with you. It looks like 63% of folks have seen within your organization a victim or survivor of trafficking. 11% said no, and 26% said I am not sure.
Okay, great. Great. Thank you for sharing those responses with us. That's very helpful to really, get an understanding of where, what sort of audience we're looking at. So just as many of you may be aware, there's a lot of trafficking, human trafficking that happens throughout the world. So, just worldwide, there's nearly 21 million people who are victims of forced labor, human trafficking, according to the International Labor Organization. And so as you're looking at this statistic, right, we're looking at these 21 million people, and we're looking at the different types of trafficking that are taking place. So we have 68% that are labor. And I think, to that point, oftentimes when we're thinking about trafficking, most people kind of go into sex trafficking, or they think that that's the highest percentage, when it's actually labor trafficking, right? It's a 68%. We then have sex trafficking, which compiles about 22% of cases, at least, that are reported and that the International Labor Organization knows about. And then you have 10%, which is obviously a smaller percentage of state-imposed. So when we're talking about state-imposed, we're talking about forced labor, for example, in prisons, or work imposed by the state military or rebel armed forces, that sort of those sort of conditions. And then as far as when we're talking about labor trafficking, we're really looking into exploitation and economic activities such as agriculture, construction, domestic work, or servitude, manufacturing, and then obviously sexual or sex trafficking would be sexual exploitation of those who are being trafficked. So, okay. So as we're looking at the problem within the U.S., if you take a look at this heat map is representing cases from the National Human Trafficking Hotline, and all the cases that were received in every form of trafficking in 2015. So this is from last year. And as you can see, there's quite a high concentration on both, and the West Coast. It seems to kind of spread out a little bit in the middle of the U.S. But if you take a look at in Colorado, right, you see how there's that heat spot in Denver and in different areas of the state. So that's something important to notice and to acknowledge, is that as you're looking in your agency and how many of these cases you're serving, or at least that you're aware about that are happening. 63%, that's a pretty good percentage as far as knowing that these victims and survivors are coming to your agency. But also there could be more victims or cases that are coming to you that may just not be identifying as victims of human trafficking, more specifically sex trafficking, because one, I mean, just identifying as such, self-identification isn't common for human trafficking victims and survivors in general. Usually that's a little, even less with sex trafficking. And as you're more likely to probably get somebody that identifies either with a domestic violence case or with sexual assault, depending obviously on the person. So for all of y'all who may not know a lot of maybe Polaris and the work, we're an anti-human trafficking organization, and we do work on the local, national, and international level. And we really look at this model of responding, equipping, and disrupting, right? So what do we mean by this? So by responding, we're really looking to respond to the needs of victims by connecting victims to survivors and service providers. So, for example, we run the National Human Trafficking Hotline, which is the hotline that's open to service providers for technical assistance, open to the community at large, and also to survivors for them to be able to get connected to a service provider that can help meet the needs, that whether they be legal or social services. Equipping, we're looking forward to equipping service providers with knowledge and tools in order to really enhance and have a robust network in which the providers can feel supported and that they have those tools necessary to be able to truly assist these clients as they come out of these networks. And by disrupting, that's something that we feel is key to being able to address human trafficking, is really being able to understand what the networks are. And we'll talk about some of the networks today, what those look like, and in order to address it, we do need to disrupt the network, right? So these networks can be disrupted through targeted interventions and campaigns. And so we're going to talk about one specific intervention that we're looking at. As far as the priorities that Polaris has, we definitely have, as we're looking as to how to best address human trafficking, not just nationally but globally, really being able to prioritize where our efforts would make the most sense. So first is building this U.S. response model. So by that, we basically want to make sure that communities across the U.S. have access to services and coordinated efforts in that way that we're being responsive to trafficking needs and also obviously to survivors. Additionally, we're looking at North America regional build. This includes Canada, U.S., and Mexico, and making sure that we have streamlined services that can serve not only survivors and victims, but also support the service providers that are providing these services. So, for example, we run the National Human Trafficking Hotline out of Polaris, but also we're working with Mexico and a specific agency there called Consejo Ciudadano, who is now running a human trafficking hotline as well, and we're looking to do that with Canada as well, and that way we're having streamlined services there. Next is the initiative that we're going to be talking about today, which is sex trafficking from Mexico, and how to disrupt not just the network, but also how to enhance the support available to survivors coming out of these networks, and illicit massage businesses, and being able to dismantle those as well. So we're going to take a look as far as data and what what kind of information we've been able to gather. So luckily, because we have the national hotline, we're able to really take the information from each case and analyze it and begin to draw some conclusions, draw out what networks could look like, or being able to map out where cases are coming from and maybe similarities between cases, so we can best understand what it is that we're working with. So what we have for analysis, we have over 1,500 cases that and these are phone calls, right? Again, this specifically to the National Human Trafficking Resource Center. So we know that this is representative of the information that we have, but it by no means does that mean that this is the only information that is out there. It does not mean that there are only 1,500 cases of sex trafficking from Mexico and Latin America in the U.S. Obviously, there's a lot more. We just obviously have not heard about them. But from the information that we do have, we have over 1,500 cases for analysis that were received between December 2007 through January 2016. Within those 1,500 cases, there were over 5,000 potential victims described. So when we're talking about potential victims, basically that is a person that could be a victim or survivor of human trafficking, specifically sex trafficking. We'll use the term potential victim because we don't want to assume or certify them as a victim, since these are calls and we don't have the ability to do that. As far as cases go, there were 44 cases reported within 44 states. And then we also, what was interesting was we received cases reported in 17 of 20 of the Latin American countries. So the only 3 that were not reported, or where we didn't receive calls from, was Uruguay, Paraguay, and Chile. So basically what that would look like is somebody would call, this could either be somebody living in let's say Mexico, for example, or someone vacationing there and calling and either providing a tip or saying, there's something that doesn't look quite right, or, even a friend or a person themselves calling about this situation. So as we're looking at the quality of this data, we can see the caller proximity to the victim, right? So who's actually making the calls to the hotline? As you can see, 42% is direct contact with the potential victim. What that could be is either the person is calling themselves, right, or advocate is calling with this potential victim. So that is the highest percentage of our calls that we're getting. The next biggest piece is 26%. So that's observation of suspicious activity. Again, the hotline is open to anyone, and they can report anonymously if they would like, or if they have information that they can give us, they're welcome to do that. So 26% of the calls that came in, that's how they were identified, through observation of suspicious activity. And then 17% was indirect contact with the potential victim. So this is either that the caller may have a relative, or even at times the buyers, right? So the buyers who are purchasing sex may be calling in for these cases. And the last part is the victim self-report, and basically that's the victim identifying themselves as a victim of human trafficking. So the way that is different from that 42% is that usually that 42%, it may not be as clear cut, or they may have more questions, but the 15% is they themselves feel like it is a situation of human trafficking. So here is what this data looks like once it's put on a heat map. And again, these cases that we have here are specific to sex trafficking, either from Mexico or Latin America. Again, you'll see that there's a high concentration in California. There's a high concentration in Texas, along New York, Washington, D.C., New Jersey, Atlanta. Obviously, in Florida, we have quite a few. But I think something to point out and to notice is just how there's this high concentration in Colorado, what seems to be Denver and those surrounding areas. Right, and so as we go through this, you may already know that your agency, or that you personally have seen some of these cases, or as you start rethinking through some of the case facts and just kind of what's come up, maybe it'll fit into this case. So we're going to look a little bit into the victim and survivor demographics, right? So who are these people who are being put into these different networks, and where are they coming from? So it's interesting to note that the cases, there's the majority of them, 52%, reference potential minor victims. So a case can include various individuals, right? So it could be one residential brothel that maybe had 10 different women girls there. So if at least one of those individuals was under the age of 18, then we will count them towards this potential minor victim. So we'll count that case towards that potential minor. As you can see, there's a high percentage, right? Over 50% of those cases do have potential minors within that case. Also important to note is that although the highest percentage as far as gender is female, which for the most part is expected. I mean, 11% of males, that's still significant enough to note. The nationalities that we're noticing from potential victims, the highest one is from Mexico. And I think, one is definitely the proximity, but also the networks seem to be pretty well established, the criminal networks that are bringing these women and girls through, either from Mexico or through Mexico. They're well established there, and they have, the network set up also throughout the U.S. And we'll get into those models in just a little bit. Then you have Texas, the United States. And so as we're looking at United States, basically a person can be, have nationality through the U.S. and still be a victim of sex trafficking from Mexico and Latin America. So to know, a person could have dual nationality, right? And so as we're looking at this, it's important to also notice that the numbers for Central America, so as we're looking at Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador, if you add those up, it's over half of what Mexico currently has. But, as you're taking that in relation to the population of Mexico, Central America is just about a third of Mexico's population. So just the rate of human trafficking, specifically sex trafficking of women and girls, is drastically higher in Central America as we compare population ratio to those of being trafficked. So how are these people being recruited, right? How are these potential victims being recruited? The one that has come up the most has been smuggling related. Basically what this ends up looking like is that people are trying to immigrate into the U.S., either utilizing coyotes or there's a criminal network that may be involved, and then they ask for ransom, or as they're migrating or they're crossing the border, they might be sold into a trafficking situation. So that it could also be a promise of passage into the U.S. that could come with a job offer, and then really having it turn out to be trafficking. So there's a bit of an overlap with the job offer and advertisement. We've seen a high number of cases where women and girls are promised jobs. Oftentimes there'll be a restaurant job, housekeeper job. When they get to the U.S., they realize that is not the case at all. And oftentimes, if they had any sort of visa or just any documentation, those are taken away, and as a way of controlling where they're going. And additionally, we have familial, which is the next one, and this is basically either forcing or selling the person into the situation, into the trafficking situation. And then you'll go down the list as far as false promises, intimate partner, abduction, coercion, etc. So how, again, and I think within this field of domestic violence, sexual assault, and then trafficking, a lot of people wonder, why do these people stay? Why are they still in this situation? So there's a lot of complex reasons as to why one would stay in this situation. For example, we already know that power and control plays a huge part into any sort of domestic violence, sexual assault, or trafficking. I think something to know is with human trafficking, there's additional isolation and confinement. So if somebody's being brought from a different country, they may not have any family support here. They may not have any sort of community, and oftentimes, where they work will often be limited to where they're allowed to go. So that's definitely something that would, make someone anxious as far as trying to seek out help. And oftentimes people, again, are not self-identifying as a victim of trafficking. At times they feel like they're indebted, and that's what they've been told, that they have a debt either to a coyote or to a criminal network, that in which case that they need to work off. The next one is a potential minor in commercial sex. So basically, the reason why that's so high is because the statistics on the age of the potential victims are that high, right? Again, it's that 52% of cases. but additionally, because they are a minor, they don't have a choice. Economic, they feel like they need to work. Not and in some cases they either feel in debt, or also that in order to survive, that they need to be able to work. And the next one, I think, comes with a lot of additional complex challenges. So a threat to harm the subject, family, or other. As we're noticed with criminal networks with ties in Mexico, is that oftentimes the families back home are being threatened, and to a large extent those threats are very real. And it's not, unfortunately, it's an environment where there's not a lot of trust in law enforcement, specifically in Mexico and Central America. And so for a person receiving threats towards their family back home, where they feel like there's no really anything that they can do, there's no one they can reach out to, you can only imagine how difficult and scary it is to even reach out for help. So it does make a lot of sense that they do what they can to keep themselves, and especially their family, as safe as they can. So we're going to go into a little bit about the venues and business models. So I think, as we're talking about these venues and business models, it'll be important to see what your what you have heard. If maybe some of the clients and participants that are coming to your programs, they may be identifying some of these flags for you. So that might be helpful. So just starting with the first slide, these are the most common venues that we've seen in this type of case, in a sex trafficking from Mexico or Latin America case. So the first one, or the highest one, is the residential brothel. And we're going to go through each one of these to explain and to talk about what these actually look like, and what, how those networks work. So there's a residential brothel, which is the highest. There's a bar, club, or cantina. It depends on the area of the U.S. that you're in, and they may be called different things. So for example, in Texas, cantinas are the most common. Cantinas are also common in California, so they may be known as that, right? In New York, New Jersey, it may be a bar and a club. So that's just something to stay attuned to. There's also escort service and delivery service, personal sexual servitude, and you can see the rest as they go down. So the first one is residential brothels. And you can see that the highest prevalence is those darker green shaded areas, which is California and Texas. And on the East Coast, you have some of those networks popping up in those venues, and then you have some within the the mid-U.S. So what do these actually look like? The traffickers are often Mexican traffickers, and they're notably associated with Tlaxcala based trafficking groups. So for those of you that have worked with sex trafficking specifically from Mexico, Tlaxcala is a state which Tenancingo is out of. So Tenancingo is a city that is very well known for traffickers. A lot of the families that have been trafficking women to the U.S. have ties to Tenancingo. It's not the only place, and oftentimes it's received a lot of media coverage, and so people may be more aware about Tenancingo, Tlaxcala, but it's not, again, it's not the only place, and different, as these business models get passed down from generation to generation and they get spread across the networks, the business model can be replicated through other states. It has been replicated through other states in Mexico, and also through the networks here in the U.S. So for this specific model, the residential brothel, that's what we've seen is it's often Mexican traffickers. The victims that they seem to target, the potential victims, are usually Mexican and Central American women most of the time. That age range seems to be the most broad, so from 16 to 35 typically, but the youngest that we've seen is 15, and we've seen women as old as in their early 50s. As far as how they recruit, there's earlier on, I would say, a decade ago or so, it was more common for this romance method to take place. So basically, what it would look like is these these groups, these individuals from Tlaxcala would seek out girls, not often or not necessarily in Tlaxcala because people are aware of what's going on, but it could be surrounding states, and they would court the girls. They would establish a relationship with them, and in different accounts we've heard that it's a significant amount of time as far as courting, at least 3 months before they would suggest moving to the U.S. or marrying them. And so a lot of the girls thought that they were actually getting married to these individuals, and when they were proposing for them to come to the U.S. for work, to them everything seemed okay. A lot of them met their families, and once they would get to the U.S., they would find out that it was, a sex trafficking situation. And so that's one of the biggest methods we've seen. As we've been looking through the data, it seems like that seems to not be as common anymore. It could be because of the length of time that it takes, and there are other methods of recruitment, but we know that that's still a potential method of recruitment. So other potential victims could be helping recruit, and again, job offers seem to be common. So catering, so what may you see in your community as far as catering? So the market that they're catering to is really Latino clientele, almost exclusively. And we've seen a lot of advertisement using tarjeta. So those are like similar to business cards, right? So oftentimes they're not going to necessarily have information on what what services are available, but it'll be keywords or even symbols. If you have a tarjeta, you know what it means, right? So if you're seeking those services, you know exactly what the tarjeta means. Some of them we've seen in Spanish language newspapers, some word of mouth. If you see there on the bottom of your screen on the right-hand side, that's an example from a newspaper, Spanish-speaking newspaper. So se vende rosas. Basically, they're selling roses, which are not roses. It's people. The typical network structure that we've seen is that there are recruiters and smugglers in Mexico, and who will work towards bringing, not only recruiting the girls, bringing them here to the U.S. locations, and then there will be house managers in each location, and there are people who are lower in the criminal network who will be the drivers, right? These are kind of lower positions, and they will drive the girls from brothel to brothel. So that's the first venue that we're looking at. The second one is cantinas. This seems to be very, very prevalent, again, in Texas, definitely California, and then in some additional states throughout the U.S. So cantinas, these seem to be mostly operated by Mexican, Salvadorian, or Honduran rings, and they are most commonly seen a lot, amongst that community. The victims, as you will see, it's a younger demographic, so it's Latina victims, usually between the ages of 16 and 20, late 20s. The recruitment, and this is interesting because it is a legal establishment. It's a restaurant or cantina. You'll see the fake job offers. There's definitely smuggling related, and sometimes not as common, but sometimes the romance method. The marketing, again, they cater to Latino clientele, usually exclusively, and they advertise by word of mouth. I think the important thing to note here is that in many of these venues, the marketing and the catering to Latino clientele usually allows for this business to continue. So, one, if you have law enforcement that's trying to work with to close down these sort of venues, you may not have somebody that possesses the linguistic capabilities to be able to enter these different avenues, but also, the traffickers, they've been doing this for a long time. They know what they're doing. And so even when there is law enforcement that may speak Spanish, sometimes they will not cater if it's not a regional accent, right? So it's even the accent that they're looking into, and that they're adapting their business model as law enforcement is working to address this. They're also, the traffickers are also working on their end to continue. The typical network structure that you'll see is it's very similar to a residential brothel. I think the added complexity here is that it is a legitimate business where women seem to be independent. They seem to have the ability to leave and go as they wish. Obviously, with threats and what we know about power and control, that is definitely not the case. But as people may be entering these establishments where it seems like it's a legitimate establishment, it may be more difficult to pick up that those working in cantinas are not there out of their own free will. So, and I think it's also important to note that there are different names and there's different ways that a cantina may present. So, some places it may be called a Latino nightclub, a casita, bodega, Pony Bars in Houston, and 41 clubs. That's slang in Chicago. Basically, it's referring to the typical charge for customers. So it'll be $20 for the house, $20 for women, and then $1 for linens. Then we go into the escort and delivery service. So there's a significant overlap with the residential brothels because they are able to drive the women and girls out to other locations. So they may be driving them out to residences, hotels, mobile brothels, agricultural work sites, and basically that's bringing them to where there is agricultural work going on and giving those services there. So the Houston model cantina may also run escort services instead of having the commercial sex occur on premises. So they may, instead of just having those services in the cantina, they may drive them off the location. One, because it's lower visibility to law enforcement, but also it allows there to be some continued sense of legality of what's going on within that venue. So, I know that this is a lot of information as far as, what the problem is. And I think it is important to understand what we're seeing. And again, this is specific to the National Human Trafficking Resource Center and the calls that they've received. So we know that, one, human trafficking is underreported, but also knowing that it's underreported, we know that this data does not capture all of the cases. We know that there's more out there. And we know that there's more that are gonna be coming out, in your community. So we want to make sure that people feel one, knowledgeable that of the problem, but also that providers and individuals feel that they have the tools necessary to be able to respond, or at least to connect these survivors and victims to the different services that they may need. So Polaris recently launched a strategic initiative in order to address this type of sex trafficking. And really we're looking at being able to disrupt the Latino sex trafficking network by collaborating across service providers and law enforcement in order to create a robust system response, and by driving an environment of awareness that prevents future trafficking. So, things to notice here is that when we, when we talk about sex trafficking or human trafficking, people may acknowledge that there is some sort of problem worldwide, even nationally, but oftentimes you don't believe that it's happening within your own city or within your own community. So with that being said, let's go ahead and open up the second poll and see what, kind of what people have noticed within their community.
Hey everyone, it's Rosa again. So sorry for the delay. I had to find my headphones so that I can do this properly. Seeing human trafficking within my community. So select one of the following. yes, no, I'm not sure. And then also, you know, if you have something specific that you'd like to share, you can always type that into the question/chat box, and we could, you know, talk about what exactly it is you are seeing. So far, we have 71% of people have voted. It looks like the majority, yes, we are seeing that. 10% no, 24 I'm not sure. I'm going to leave this open for about 5 more seconds. Looks like we have 76% of people have voted. So if you haven't voted, please feel free to vote. And if you're seeing something very specific, please type that into the question/chat box and share with everybody exactly what it is that you're seeing. So I am going to close this poll now. And I'm going to share the results with you. It looks like 63% of folks said yes, they are seeing that within their community. 13% said no, and 23% said I am not sure. I'm going to check the questions just to see if anybody typed anything. Not yet, but that's okay. If you feel like sharing, just feel free to type that in.
Okay, perfect. Thank you for doing that. So yeah, so I mean, I think it could be again that this group, you all are very knowledgeable on just the different types of issues that that are facing the community. But again, in most cases, people underreport, and also we assume that just that we're not, because we're not seeing it directly, that it may not exist. As you can see from the different statistics and heat maps that we went through, there's definitely cases in Denver, right? And again, these are just the cases that we received phone calls from. It's not every case because they're not all reported, but also there's some that have not yet identified. So as we're looking to be in addressing this form of trafficking and being able to disrupt this network, there are different things that we need to do in order to address it. So the first is we need to respond to survivors, right? And how do we do that? We want to increase access to hotlines across the borders. So we want to know, or survivors and potential victims to know that if they're in Mexico and there's a network that they're being pulled into, that they have access to a hotline in Mexico, in the U.S., and in Canada, and that we can collaborate between countries and across borders to be able to address the needs of these victims and survivors, and making sure that they have the support needed regardless of where they're at. In order to do so, we obviously need to help connect service providers in the U.S. and in Mexico to be able to effectively deliver these critical services. So a few things that we're doing is we're connecting with service providers that already have some of this expertise in serving sex trafficking victims specifically from this area, this geographical area, but also for service providers that are seeing, this community that already have access into the Latino and Hispanic community and would like to, be able to expand their services to serve human trafficking victims. Then we want to make sure that we have materials and trainings available that will allow them to have those robust services. Additionally, we want to be able to support survivors through the criminal justice process. So something to notice is that, oftentimes these human trafficking cases are not prosecuted as they should be. We see that that's the case with Mexico as well. So there's, last year there were quite a few cases reported, and I believe it was only like 6 cases that ended up getting prosecuted, which was not anywhere close to what what needed to happen. Again, we know that it's underreported, so that makes the problem even worse, that these prosecutions are not happening. So we're working to ensure that the criminal justice process is fair to these victims and survivors, and that it's helping them. Again, the next piece is really driving awareness in anti-demand and prevention efforts. So we're going to be launching a multi-channel anti-demand campaign in the U.S. aimed at Latino men. And this is where we're reaching out to you all as experts in your field, also experts in your community, to really understand what messaging works with your community. It may be different for regions, between states, between cities, and we want to know what, if there's something that has worked for you, we want to know about it, because in order to really address and change this problem in this network, we need to all work together. It cannot be one agency trying to do work that maybe somebody else is already doing. It's not about duplicating services, it's about collaborating between organizations, agencies, and sectors to really be able to confront this and being able to address it the best way that we can. So as we're thinking about reaching out to our Hispanic and Latino community, we want to, we're well aware that, there's certain things that we just don't talk about in the Hispanic and Latino community. It could be, due to cultural barriers or, just different cultural context. But also, there's just that awareness piece that needs to also be touched upon, right? We need to make sure that the community at large has awareness around human trafficking, around sex trafficking, and what that looks like. Again, we need to conduct outreach in the Latino and Hispanic community to understand, and service providers really, to understand and deepen that understanding of this issue, and to also develop effective messaging to drive prevention efforts. And so I think that's a piece, prevention is a piece that's important to touch on. It's important to discuss, and different organizations and different groups are going to look at it a little differently. As we were talking about the catering to Latino men exclusively, almost exclusively by these networks, it can have different implications for both the community and also the potential victims that are in these situations. It could be, one, the way that they survive, but also there are nuances within those who purchase. We've heard from other organizations that at times, these men, they're voicing kind of these feelings of feeling alone. They're here in this country, they're working, but they don't have a community. So taking into that account, how do we work to address demand? Because we cannot reduce sex trafficking when so many people are willing to purchase sex. So we do need to address it. We need, in order to really be able to address this issue. And there are, again, there are nuances to purchasing sex within the Latino community, and we cannot reduce it until people stop buying. So it's important that we talk about what messaging is helpful, what organizations or in what settings they will work best as well. In order to address this, again, we need to disrupt in the network that is working to bring these women and girls and in this trafficking situation. So through the data that we are able to analyze, we are able to see what the network looks like and how we can eradicate it. So by mapping network infrastructure, we can identify where women and girls are being recruited, where we can identify entry points, so where are these individuals crossing certain borders, or where are they flying into, how they're being controlled and abused, and what sort of financial flows are happening. So where is money being directed, where is it being sent back, and also determining what sort of connection points may be tied to organized crime, gang, and cartel activity. So it's important that perpetrators be held accountable for their actions, and we feel like this is an important step in being able to do that, is really understanding the network and making it a very high-risk situation. So right now, because there is not a lot of prosecution of these cases, the risk is not very high at all. It's very high profit. And so with low risk and high profit, this network is going to continue. We need to switch that equation, and we need to make it a low profit, high risk type of model where it will discourage any sort of human trafficking from this network. So what are solutions as you're looking to work with these victims and survivors, and how can you be helpful, and how can you use the expertise that you already have in order to spread that network, in order to expand, that safety net for survivors as they come out. I think it's important to note that oftentimes there's not a lot of Spanish-speaking services as far as social services, either case management or therapy services for Spanish-speaking clients. So that's already, a barrier that we're facing, and therefore it's very important that we collaborate and we work amongst service providers, so that we can best serve the needs of the clients that we're seeing through referrals, or that we can support you in any way that we can in order for you to be able to lend that support to them as well. So how can we as community members and service providers respond? The first is really looking at a strength-based, survivor-centered approach, right? So ensuring safety and confidentiality and well-being is very important. Really being able to provide a private area as you're meeting with the clients, where they know that the exit is near invisible, where the people entering and leaving is either limited or controlled, and where the victim and survivor can feel safe. So as many of you, I would assume, are service providers, you may already have this information, and I'm sure that you already put it into practice. I think it's extra important, specifically with this population, because the need for safety and confidentiality is very important, especially as we're talking about these criminal networks. That it's not just one pimp or one trafficker, it's networks, and so not just here in the U.S. but in Mexico, and so the fear and the safety concerns are very real to that person and to that person's family. Also thinking about safety in general for your agency, and just making sure that you understand kind of what that entails. Obviously, we don't know everything, but just making sure that that's something that we're keeping in mind. Being able to provide as much information as possible to the participant in your program, just letting them know what are the next steps. A lot of these individuals are may not have established community yet within their current state or city. They may not speak the language, so really being able to identify the different steps that are going to be happening is key in allowing them to feel like they have some sort of control, and that they are able to make the decision that fits them best. And being able to address any feelings of powerlessness or previous situations of control. We want them to have that voice. And once they have all the information, that they can make an informed decision on what feels best for them, what they want to do. And sometimes, there's obviously the wishes that we have for clients and for participants. There's things that we want for them, but again, it does need to be their choice on how they proceed in either partaking of and enrolling in a program, or choosing not to do that. Kind of what they decide to do. We want to make sure that we give them the voice and we give them the support to do what they feel is best for them. In responding to survivors, it's important to keep in mind to not expect survivors or victims to self-identify. So it's important to kind of look at the flags, right? So not necessarily that we're going to certify someone as a victim of sex trafficking right away, but looking at some flags. So if a woman tells you about, coming from migrating and being in, having to work for sex, or, being exploited for commercial sex, and, there's some tie to Tlaxcala or Tenancingo, that's not a coincidence, right? It's a huge red flag. And to being able to identify that this individual may be coming from a sex trafficking situation. So the reason why we want to make sure that we are able to notice these flags is because there's additional services, and there are additional benefits to an extent that are available to them if they are a victim or survivor of human trafficking in general. And we'll talk about those in a second. Again, allowing them to meet on their terms, recognizing the symptoms of trauma and coping mechanisms. So, if a person it's quiet or if they're arriving late, it's not necessarily, just because they, they didn't want to come on time. It could be a lot of the trauma working there. And you're really making that interview conversational and not an interrogation, allowing them to share what feels comfortable for them. And when you're thinking about other considerations and worth working with Latina survivors is, thinking about fears that may be really, very real to them, such as safety, such as potential immigration status, that they may not feel comfortable disclosing or that they may be worried about disclosing to you. Are they being watched or monitored? Thinking about how they were recruited. Do they have access to their money? Are they able to leave? Do they have their identification documents? So just really thinking about that, and obviously, of course, their immediate needs. So, as you're talking to survivors, there are various, and this is at times a good way to establish rapport and just some sort of relationship is just being able to discuss what potential immigration relief may be available to them. So you should, as practitioners, it's important to be aware of just some of the immigration remedies available to foreign national victims of human trafficking. So luckily, there are various ways that a person could get an immigration remedy if they're a victim. So one is continued presence. The T visa is specifically for human trafficking victims. A U visa, many of you may be aware about, it's for victims of crime, VAWA, asylum, and then special immigrant juvenile status, or SIJS. So SIJS, that was the most common with unaccompanied minors coming in, especially a few years ago when there was a large influx of unaccompanied minors coming in from Central America. There was this a special status given to those children, and so you may see some of these children that may qualify for those. So by being able to correctly flag these potential victims and survivors, they may be able to access some of the benefits available to them because of that situation. So that, again, that's why it's important to be able to, again, they may not self-identify, they may not even be aware that that's something that is possible for them to identify as. If you're able to connect them with if your organization provides these services, either legal or social services for this population, then we want to make sure that they get connected to the best services possible. So how can you be engaged? We would love to engage with you all as far as service providers. So there are various ways to be engaged. One is, if you're interested, you could be your agency could be listed as a supporting service provider contributing to this project or sitting on an informal advisory board. If that's something that you're interested in or that your agency is interested in, I'll be giving my contact information in a moment, and I would love to hear from you. Also thinking about if funding were available. If funding were available, would you want to participate with your agency in crisis response for your region? So if we're thinking about the U.S. as a whole and how there are certain states or certain regions that have a lack, if there's a lack of service provision within that area, if a case were to break, or if there was some identified victim of this type of trafficking, if someone in your state or in your agency would be willing to respond, is that something that you're interested in? Being able to serve as a region or as a state to serve those who may not have the ability to access services in their language. Additionally, being able to participate in a network of providers sharing resources via an electronic platform. So if we have a platform, would you be willing to share your different materials that you may use, but also being able to benefit from other agencies who are also sharing? We would also be posting different things. So we know in different areas and different regions, there's different outreach materials, there's different assessments, there's different modes of intervention, And so by being able to compile these on a web platform, people can access them, and that way we're collaborating and helping each other to see, what would work best for your community. And then finally, we have a report on cantinas coming out in September, the first week of September. So basically, this is a hefty report and going through the analysis of cantinas and the networks and different cases, and then recommendations for law enforcement, for service providers, for healthcare, etc. So if you'd like to receive that, we would be happy to include you as that comes out later in the next couple months. So here is my information. If you are looking for resources for victim in order to serve victims of human trafficking, you can find that at traffickingresourcecenter.org. You can also reach out to me directly. I'm happy to talk over the phone or email, whatever works best for you. My email is kromero@polarisproject.org. There's my phone number, and then our website. You're always welcome to look there and see the different initiatives that we have going on, the different materials that we have available. And again, this does need to be a collaborative effort in order to really address the issue of sex trafficking of women and girls from Mexico. We don't want to do this on our own. It doesn't make sense for us to do it on our own. It needs to be communities, it needs to be service providers who are doing the work on the ground, and we want to be able to support you all. So those are all the information that I wanted to share. If there's any questions, I think we have like 3 minutes, and I can answer those. Or if you want to email me, that's also great as well.
Well, I just wanted to say thanks to Karen for presenting. This is Rosa, by the way. I know that folks may have lots of questions and just may not have felt like a really good time to ask. So if you, oh, look, we did get a question. Will the PowerPoint be sent out later in the week? Yes, we will. We will definitely send out a follow-up email, and in that email we will have a copy, a PDF version of the PowerPoint, and then you can connect with Karen if you need something more substantial than that. Is there more information on the symbols, phrases used for marketing? We'll have to have Karen answer that. Looks like we're getting in some last-minute questions for Karen, which is fantastic. Not to worry if she's not able to answer that right now. We will definitely, can you email Karen info to all? Yes. On the follow-up email, we will CC Karen on that, and so you'll also have her email address there, and then you can contact her whenever it's convenient for you. Agata, do you have anything to add?
Nope. Just to say thank you so much to Karen for participating in this amazing webinar. All the information was fantastic, and I think, like she said, there's a lot of opportunity for us here in Colorado to connect with Polaris and provide more services and support to our community, and specifically to survivors of sex trafficking, which, like she mentioned and she showed us, the map shows that we do have those survivors within our area. And the other thing I would like to say is to please fill out the survey if you have any ideas or some specific topics that you would like us to bring into the table through the webinar. I will more than be willing to do the best that I can to bring those providers or those specific people to tell us or teach us how to improve our work. So please fill out that survey and help us to do a better job into bringing information and information that is important and relevant for you. Other than that, thank you so much for participating.
Thank you all. Talk to y'all soon.